in terms of the verification, there are different aspects as well, apart from just the testing, but also we need to look at the reviews and peer reviews and third-party reviews. So we would use some of these requirements review sessions to help us understand how the requirements have been structured and how they're going to be, converted into the artifacts later. So it's important that we stick to some of the principles. Minimum text, more pictures. So essentially, there was a time, as I said, I used to write these FRS, functional requirement specifications, SRS, software requirement specification, MRD, market requirements document, BRD, business requirement document. These huge sets of documents, tons and tons of pages of content there, text, and maybe one or two diagrams here. We used to spend as BAs, at least a good 4 or 5 months to write these 200, 300, 500 pages documents and then get it across. And so that's the typical waterfall. It's a failure. We've understood that it's not going to work out because requirements are bound to change. And they're so rapidly changing that by the time you complete your sign off and you start your development, you finish your development, the whole scenario, the whole landscape would have changed. The technologies changed, the businesses would have been gobbled up by somebody else, your customer space changed, your customer base, user base has significantly changed, the needs have changed, the markets themselves have changed. So that is one of the reasons why we moved to the agile development. So when we talk about that, so we're trying to have these user stories which are very, very simple, very crisp definitions of your requirements. Instead of writing those tons of documents, what you're talking about is just that one liner. As a user, I like to do this so that I get this benefit. So that's a very succinct way of defining your requirement. And also not just requirement, but you try and match it up with the wireframes. You create some kind of models, Visio models, prototypes. All of these would actually help you to deliver what is the essence of the requirement. And that is important. So, and also you need to have this kind of communication. And that's why you try and use this walkthroughs or the workshops where you engage the end users, the developers and testers and architects, analysts. You get all of them into one room. You try and communicate your requirements. So you specify, you identify the requirements, you specify the requirements. You then would try and trace the requirements. You've got the communicate requirements. So you're trying to actually let them know what is the requirement. So it's important all of us are in the room, and then we discuss what is required for us. And then they would actually come and say, oh, by the way, this may not be possible. Let's do it this way. I think we need to have these acceptance criteria. So it's important that we realize that we are not perfect as BA. So we might have to make some changes if required based on the feedback from the team members, from the stakeholders, so that we can try and rectify later. So it's important that we take all of these feedback and the corrections and the suggestions and recommendations when we conduct these workshops, and then we should be able to follow through with that feedback and make the changes into the requirements documents. And then prioritize. That's very important because not all of the suggestions and recommendations are important. We need to try and prioritize what is the most important, what is the most urgent, depending on the value that we are delivering. So it's important that we focus on what is it that makes important, that is not just important but also urgent, and that needs to go into the requirements backlog. And prioritize requirement issues beforehand so that you know that you have this ordered, this is the way that you see the requirements to be delivered. You come up with that, you suggest, and then you're open for discussions. And then we also need to ask for feedback. We need to ask them probing questions. We need to make sure that they're thinking through, they've got enough bandwidth for us to spend the time with us, do a bit of brainstorming, make sure that we have got enough information to go back with and work on. And that's why it's important for us to be open for this kind of criticism, constructive criticism, because don't forget, we're all part of the team. We're all working as BAs. We've got that responsibility to get the requirements right. And when we get the requirements right, the architects would create the perfect architecture which would match this one. The designers would then follow and try and come up with designs which would help meet the requirements in the architecture. The programmers and developers would be able to work on the code so that they can implement the solution based on the architecture and the design and the requirements. And then the testers would come in and see whether the build and the code that the developers would generate, would create, is it matching to what is mentioned and specified in the requirements. So all of us are performing different roles here, but then all we're trying to do is to make sure that we're delivering a product for our customers, users, and stakeholders. That's the unified vision. So we should be open for criticism. We should be open for feedback. We should be willing to take on board any suggestions, any recommendations, any things that needs to improve, needs to be done within the requirements context. That's very, very important. And when we try and do this kind of workshops or walkthroughs, it's important that we, even my practice is to actually send them not the full document, because sometimes it's a lot of things to take in, at least a gist of a summary of what they can expect, and then give them an idea what is going to be discussed in the session, so they're better prepared. So it's important that you do that before we actually get into the workshop. Also, it's better to have a good blend and good mix of different stakeholders in the workshop, because that's the main advantage of having a workshop, or this kind of walkthrough session, or JAD session was what we call joint application development, JAD. So because you're now getting into the room, not just one set of people with one view, but actually multiple views, multiple perspectives. So you get developers, you get designers, you get architects, analysts, UX designers, perhaps even some of the quality and testers, quality assurance and the test management people. And so you try and listen to and be open to all these different viewpoints, so you can effectively improve the product. And then, of course, what is important for us is to actually have a clear scope and definition of what is in scope and what is out of scope. So it's very important. We do not want to get unnecessarily dragged into things which are not relevant. So we should try and have a clear moderator. We should have a clear moderation with respect to what is relevant to this context within the workshop and what is not. So if you're going off the tangent, in a different tangent, we should try and bring it back into the discussion, and then try and have that sense of productive discussion.